It began on a night when the cold seemed to swallow sound, February 9th, 2004. New Hampshire lay under a blanket of snow, the kind that absorbs every echo until the world feels muted, emptied, waiting. Along Route 112, a two-lane highway winding through the dark heart of the White Mountains, a car sat skewed against a snowbank, its headlights pointed uselessly into the night. The engine was silent, and inside that car there was no one. That car belonged to a 21-year-old nursing student named Maura Murray, and from that moment forward, she would never be seen again. Maura had always been described as bright, fiercely intelligent, but also quietly complex. She was the kind of young woman who seemed to move through the world with purpose, though those closest to her often sensed there were shadows in her mind, things she rarely shared, things she held tightly to herself. At the University of Massachusetts Amherst, where she was enrolled, she studied nursing. Her friends knew her as diligent, ambitious, though sometimes burdened by a quiet restlessness. To her family, she was loved dearly, but her life had not been free of turbulence. In the days before she vanished, something shifted. Subtle, but undeniable. On February 5th, she broke down at her job in the campus security office, where she had worked shifts monitoring calls. Her supervisor described her as nearly catatonic, repeating only the words, "my sister," over and over, though the sister she spoke of claimed she had no idea why Maura was so upset. A few days later, Maura told professors she would be gone for a week because of a death in the family. But there was no death, no funeral, no explanation. That Monday evening, February 9th, she packed her black Saturn sedan with clothing, textbooks, toiletries, and bottles of alcohol. She withdrew nearly $300 from an ATM. Surveillance footage shows her standing there, shoulders tense, her dark hair framing a face that betrayed nothing. No fear, no excitement, just stillness. She then stopped at a liquor store, purchasing boxed wine, Kahlua, vodka, and a six-pack of beer. And then she drove north. No one knows exactly why. By 7:27 p.m., a neighbor along Route 112 heard a thud. Looking out the window, they saw the Saturn lodged in a snowbank, its front end damaged. A local woman passing by in her school bus pulled over. She asked Maura if she needed help. Maura declined. She said she had already called AAA, but she hadn't. There was no record of a call. There was no cell reception there anyway. The bus driver left, uneasy. He called the police around 7:42 p.m. By the time officers arrived at the scene, Maura was gone. Her car remained locked. Inside, her belongings were scattered. Maps of the White Mountains, printed directions to Vermont, a box of wine broken open across the seats, staining the interior with the sharp smell of alcohol. But there were no footprints leading away into the woods. No trail. Just silence. What happened in those crucial minutes between the crash and the arrival of the police has haunted investigators, her family, and thousands of strangers ever since. The night was brutal, temperatures sinking well below freezing. The woods pressed in tightly on both sides of the road, black and impenetrable. Even the smallest sound, the crack of ice on branches, the distant rush of a creek buried under snow, seemed amplified in that void. Anyone stepping into those woods would be swallowed whole. And yet Maura was gone. Her father, Fred Murray, would later describe the days that followed as living inside a nightmare that never ended. Volunteers gathered in numbers rarely seen for missing persons cases. Dogs were brought in, helicopters scoured the treetops, every frozen stream and hollow was searched. For days, the scent dogs traced her smell briefly, 100 yards down the road, then nothing, as if she had vanished mid-step. The investigation grew stranger with every hour. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no discarded clothing in the snow, no footprints leading into the forest, no indication that she had simply walked away to freeze. But the idea that she had been picked up within the narrow minutes between her last sighting and the arrival of police seemed almost too coincidental. Still, what other answer was there? Those who knew her best struggled to reconcile the image of Maura's life as it appeared from the outside, focused, determined, close to her family, with the fractures that were beginning to show in her final days. A past incident of credit card fraud, a crash in her father's car just 2 days before her disappearance, and that lie about a family death. It all formed a picture that refused to settle into clarity. Was she running? Was she escaping something? Or had she been lured into something darker, something waiting in the snowbound quiet of the mountains? The longer she remained missing, the more oppressive the silence became. For her family, the nights were endless. Fred would walk the roads again and again, calling her name into the empty dark, his voice bouncing back as nothing but echo. Neighbors left porch lights on for weeks, hoping she might come stumbling out of the trees, cold but alive, needing only warmth. But with every passing day, the cold reality pressed in. People do not simply vanish. Someone, or something, had taken her away. The White Mountains were no stranger to disappearances. The land itself seemed to consume the lost. Legends of hikers vanishing without a trace lingered in the local towns, each story the same. One moment, they were there. The next, they were gone. It was as though the wilderness itself held secrets that refused to be unearthed. And as February bled into March and March into April, those secrets only grew heavier. Maura Murray's disappearance was no longer just a missing persons case. It was a haunting, a wound cut into the landscape of New Hampshire, one that would never fully close. Under the weight of the New Hampshire winter, the search for Maura Murray pressed on. The snow thickened as the days passed, blanketing the woods, covering the ground in silence so absolute it seemed the earth itself had turned against those looking for her. Volunteers came from towns nearby, bundled in heavy coats and thick boots, dragging their feet across frozen ground. They formed human chains, spreading out in lines across the woods, calling her name into the void. Maura! The sound carried only a short distance before it was swallowed whole by the forest. Each call was answered only by the crunch of snow beneath boots, or the restless stir of branches overhead. The dogs strained at their leashes, noses to the wind, then faltered. Their trails always ended in the same spot, 100 yards east of where her car had been found. After that, nothing. It was as if she had evaporated. Police retraced every step of her final known hours, pulling surveillance footage, bank records, phone logs. The image was always the same. A young woman alone, moving with deliberate purpose, but leaving no explanation in her wake. The ATM camera caught her expressionless face under fluorescent light. The liquor store clerk remembered nothing unusual. No sign of panic, no trembling hands, no rush in her movements. Just a girl buying alcohol on a Monday night. And yet something was happening beneath the surface. That much was undeniable. Her dorm room remained as she left it. Neatly made bed, toiletries tucked away, boxes packed as if she had intended to be gone for longer than a day. An email left open on her computer revealed she had been in touch with her boyfriend, though their relationship had been strained. She had also been searching for rental properties in Vermont, ski lodges and cabins tucked into isolated corners of the state. It wasn't enough to form a clear motive, but it was enough to cast shadows. Fred Murray arrived quickly, his face worn with a desperation that would only deepen as years passed. He stood in front of cameras, pleading for answers, insisting his daughter would never have simply run away. "Somebody took her," he said, his voice breaking. "Somebody has her." His conviction never wavered, but conviction was not enough to pry truth from silence. The official searches wound down after a week, then resumed sporadically, each time with fewer volunteers, fewer resources, fewer fragments of hope. What lingered was not progress, but unease. Because the environment itself, the cold, the endless trees, the shadows stretching long across snow, began to feel less like backdrop and more like a predator. Imagine standing on Route 112 in the dead of winter. No streetlights, no houses, save for a few scattered farmhouses with their windows glowing faintly in the distance. The air burns your throat with every breath. The snow crunches beneath your boots but disappears instantly into the stillness. If you stop walking, stop breathing, the silence becomes unbearable, as if the woods themselves are listening, watching, waiting. For many in the search parties, it was not just the absence of Maura that haunted them. It was the sensation of being surrounded by something that resisted discovery, an invisible weight pressing in from the trees. A suffocating reminder that people do not simply vanish unless the ground itself conspires to keep them hidden. And then, in the months that followed, came the first of the disturbing clues. Inside Maura's car, investigators had found more than just maps and spilled wine. They found a book about climbing in the White Mountains, detailing trails that led deep into the wilderness. They found her packed belongings, items suggesting she had intended to stay somewhere, perhaps for days. But what unsettled them most was what they didn't find. Her wallet, her cell phone. Both were gone. If she had fled into the woods, she had done so carrying only those things. But why? Whispers began to stir. Some claimed to have seen a young woman walking along the road that night, heading east, disappearing into the darkness. Others swore there had been another car, heads lingering on the curve of Route 112 just before police arrived. The stories clashed, overlapped, contradicted one another until they became less like testimony and more like fragments of a dream. Unreliable, shifting, refusing to settle into clarity. Still, each whisper deepened the sense of dread. For her family, nights grew unbearable. Her sister Kathleen admitted she would wake to the sound of the phone, expecting news, only to find silence. Her mother sat by the window late into the night, watching the snow fall under the faint glow of street lamps, praying Maura would walk back into the light. Her father paced endlessly, returning to the site where the car had been found, staring down that empty stretch of highway as if he could will it to give her back. But the woods offered no answers, only silence. Only the smell of damp pine and rusting guardrails. Only the cruel bite of wind rolling down from the mountains. Investigators began to question whether Maura had truly intended to reach any destination at all. Was she escaping something more personal, something she could not voice? Was her trip to the north an act of desperation, or a plan she had carefully hidden from everyone around her? The deeper they looked, the more contradictions they found. A bright student, yet struggling in secret. A devoted girlfriend, yet hiding things from him. A young woman planning a future, yet vanishing without leaving a trace. Denial soon gave way to suspicion. What if someone had been waiting for her? What if the crash was no accident, but the trigger for an encounter she could not escape? The timeline left such a slim, fragile window, mere minutes in which she disappeared, that the thought became inescapable. The locals, once quiet, began to share rumors that spread like wildfire. Talk of a man seen lurking near the crash site. Talk of a red truck parked along the road in the days before. None of it solid, all of it smoke. But in cases like this, smoke is enough to suffocate. And the longer the silence stretched, the more the forest seemed to mock those searching. Days bled into weeks, weeks into months, until hope began to crack under the weight of time. For many, it was no longer just a question of what happened to Maura Murray. It was a question of what kind of force could pull someone from their life, in full view of neighbors, in a place as exposed as a roadside crash, and leave behind nothing but silence. Something had happened in those woods, something that refused to let itself be named. Panic crept in slowly, not as an abrupt moment, but as a tide that rose higher each day until it drowned even the most fragile hopes. By the spring thaw of 2004, the White Mountains had shed their winter skin. The snow receded, bearing wet earth and skeletal branches, streams swollen with meltwater rushing angrily beneath bridges. The road where Maura's car had been found looked unchanged, but the season had stripped away the thin veil of snow that once cloaked the land in purity. Now it was raw, damp, pungent with the smell of rot and swamp water. Still, she was nowhere to be found. Search teams returned with cadaver dogs. They combed riverbanks, waded through mud, poked at shallow graves of leaves and frost. Some swore the dogs picked up a faint trace, circling near an abandoned farmhouse not far from the crash site. But when investigators pried inside, they found only mildew, broken furniture, and the suffocating odor of rust and mold. No evidence. No Maura. The farmhouse stood there like a cruel echo, suggesting answers but offering none. The community's unease deepened. Locals began to treat Route 112 as cursed ground. Passing the bend where her car was left, drivers swore they felt a pressure, an invisible weight in the chest, as if the woods themselves remembered what they had swallowed. Some said the nights there were worse, that if you pulled over and killed your headlights, you could hear something moving in the trees. Not an animal, not the wind, something heavier, something deliberate. For her family, the panic never dulled. Fred Murray grew relentless, pleading with law enforcement, knocking on doors, organizing his own searches when official efforts slowed. He would return again and again to that same stretch of highway, his boots crunching gravel, his breath clouding the cold air, calling her name into nothingness. His voice cracked, raw with exhaustion, but he never stopped. He couldn't. Her boyfriend at the time, Billy, left voicemails that would later be played in documentaries and news reports. In one, his voice trembled, pleading, "Maura, it's me. You're not mad at me, I'm not mad at you. Just call me." Each word dripped with desperation. It was the sound of a man clawing at a door that would never open. Investigators scoured Maura's digital trail, but what they uncovered only thickened the fog. In the days before she vanished, she had searched online for directions to rural areas in Vermont and New Hampshire. She had also read about accidents in the White Mountains, stories of people who had not survived. Her browser history became a mirror that reflected fear, planning, and perhaps resignation. It was impossible to tell which. The theory that Maura had planned her disappearance began to take hold. Some believed she had run away, staged her own escape, and slipped into a new life somewhere far from Amherst, far from New Hampshire, far from everything that weighed on her. But that theory collapsed under scrutiny. How could she vanish with no money, no confirmed transportation, no footprints, no confirmed sightings? How could she simply erase herself, perfectly, in the narrow span of minutes? Others whispered darker possibilities, that she had been abducted, that someone had followed her that night, that the woods, silent and patient, had concealed a hunter. The thought was unbearable, but impossible to dismiss. Panic shifted into obsession. Internet forums exploded with theories, speculation, amateur sleuths dissecting every fragment of information. Was the broken box of wine in her car evidence of drinking and panic, or a staged distraction? Was the rag stuffed into the Saturn's tailpipe an odd, unexplained detail found by police, a sign of sabotage, or a desperate attempt to mask a failing car? Each clue became a puzzle piece, but none fit together. The passage of time became its own torment. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and with each sunrise, hope thinned. For those closest to her, time didn't just pass, it gnawed. Every unanswered question became sharper, every rumor heavier. By the summer of 2004, the case had shifted into something more suffocating than panic. It became a weight that pressed down on everyone connected to her. People who had never met Maura spoke of her as if they knew her, haunted by the photographs of a young woman smiling into a camera, forever frozen in the hours before she vanished. The image was unbearable because it defied reality. She was alive in those photos, her eyes bright, her hair falling softly across her face, and yet somewhere beyond the lens, she was gone. Her family refused to stop. Fred Murray pressed for deeper searches of nearby properties, insisting that someone in the area knew more than they admitted. He confronted locals, demanding answers, driven by the kind of rage only grief can sustain. In every interview, his words carried the same undercurrent. My daughter did not walk away into the woods to die. Someone took her. But the land resisted him. Every search ended in futility. Every clue dissolved into speculation. The forest never gave back what it had swallowed. The panic that had once driven people forward hardened into a quieter, more dangerous state, an obsession with shadows. Rumors multiplied. A rag in a tailpipe, a scream in the night, a red truck seen idling near the road. Each detail festered like an open wound. None brought closure. The air of the White Mountains carried a new scent now, not just pine and wet earth, but something invisible, the stink of unresolved tragedy. The kind of scent you can't scrub away, no matter how many times the ground is searched. And as the months dragged on, the truth only seemed to recede farther into the trees, slipping deeper into the silence where no one could follow. By 2005, the frenzy of the initial search had faded. The volunteers no longer lined the woods in great numbers. The helicopters no longer hovered above the White Mountains. What remained were the fragments. Faded flyers stapled to telephone poles, weather-beaten posters on gas station walls, her eyes staring out into the world from beneath layers of rain and sun damage. Her face was everywhere, yet she was nowhere. For her father, Fred, life became a ritual of obsession. Each year, on the anniversary of her disappearance, he returned to Route 112, standing in the bitter cold with candles flickering in the snow. He spoke to reporters when they came, and to the silence when they did not. His words grew heavier, his voice more ragged, but his conviction never faltered. He believed someone in those small mountain towns knew what had happened. He believed silence was not born of ignorance, but of fear. And in many ways, fear had become the air of those hills. The locals grew tired of the case, suspicious of outsiders, resentful of cameras that returned year after year. To them, the disappearance was no longer a mystery. It was a curse. Some whispered that the land itself did not forgive, that the White Mountains had always been a place where people vanished without explanation. Others simply turned away, refusing to speak, the way one refuses to open a door in the night when knocking comes from the dark. As the years deepened, Maura's case grew stranger because the world around it did not let her fade. Online, her disappearance became one of the earliest cases to be dissected by an entirely new kind of investigator, the internet sleuth. On message boards and forums, strangers spent sleepless nights poring over every scrap of information, every inconsistency, every rumor. They analyzed maps of the White Mountains as though secrets lay buried beneath contour lines. They scrutinized grainy photographs of the crash site, debating tire marks and snow patterns as if the forest itself had left a confession carved in ice. But the deeper they looked, the more monstrous the silence became. Year after year, the same theories circled endlessly. Had Maura planned to disappear, slipping away into another life? Had she been met with violence, pulled from the roadside by someone who knew the land better than she did? Or was she still out there, somewhere in those woods, bones hidden beneath moss and roots, the earth refusing to give her up? The atmosphere of the case shifted from panic to obsession, and then into something darker, reflection. Because in the absence of answers, people turned inward. They projected their own fears into her story. Parents saw their daughters in her, bright and full of potential, suddenly snatched away. Students saw themselves, the weight of secrets, the quiet battles hidden behind normal smiles. And strangers, thousands of them, found themselves staring into the void of her absence, unable to let it go because it reminded them of how fragile a life can be. Her family lived in that reflection every day. Her sister Julie admitted she would dream of Maura, vivid dreams in which Maura was alive, standing in front of her, eyes searching, lips almost forming words. But when she reached out, Maura would dissolve into shadow. Kathleen, her other sister, spoke of guilt, that she should have seen something, noticed more, been there. Guilt became a second skin, a weight they carried into every year that followed. And then nearly 13 years later, in 2017, a discovery brought the haunting back into sharp focus. Search dogs were taken to a home less than a mile from where Maura's car had been found. In the basement, the dogs alerted to something beneath the concrete floor. For her family, it felt like the moment they had been waiting for, the chance that answers lay buried in that cold ground. The smell of mildew, damp stone, and rusted pipes mixed with a suffocating anticipation. Could it be her? Could this be the place the woods had been protecting all along? But when ground-penetrating radar was used, the results were inconclusive. Excavation never happened. The house remained untouched, its basement sealed, its silence unbroken. Whatever lay beneath the concrete stayed hidden. It was as if the land itself had chosen once again to deny her return. The haunting deepened. By then, Maura's case had taken on a life beyond the facts. Documentaries, podcasts, endless online debates, the world wanted answers. But the case seemed to grow more elusive the more attention it drew. It was as though the truth retreated farther into the shadows each time someone reached for it. And through it all, Route 112 remained the same stretch of highway winding through the White Mountains, the same silence pressing down when headlights dimmed, the same curve in the road where her Saturn had once sat askew in the snow. Travelers who stopped there sometimes left flowers, others crosses or candles. A quiet shrine to a young woman who had vanished not just from the physical world but from certainty itself. Fred Murray aged with the years, but he never surrendered. He carried maps of the area, marked with places yet to be searched, his determination unbroken. "I just want to bring her home," he repeated again and again, a phrase that became both prayer and curse. For him, the years were not a passage of time, but an endless loop. Always February 2004, always the cold, always the unanswered knock of fate at his family's door. The case lives on because it never closes. It remains suspended, unfinished, like a note that will never resolve into harmony. Maura's absence is not just a disappearance. It is an echo, a reminder that the world is not as solid as we believe. That lives can be devoured not only by violence or accident, but by the silence of places that refuse to speak. And so, the question endures, gnawing at everyone who touches her story. What happened to Maura Murray in those minutes on Route 112? Was she running from her life or towards something unseen? Did she meet a stranger in the snow, or did the land itself claim her? The truth may still lie out there, in the cold earth beneath the pines, in a locked basement, in the memory of someone who will never speak. But each year that passes, the silence grows heavier. The White Mountains keep their secret, and Maura remains lost. The years did not soften the mystery of Maura Murray. They hardened it. By the time a decade had passed, her disappearance was no longer just a wound for her family. It had become something else, an obsession, a labyrinth, a story that reached into the private lives of strangers who had never known her but felt bound to her absence. It began quietly, in the corners of the internet, anonymous message boards, late-night threads, people poring over maps and timelines as if decoding sacred texts. The photographs of her Saturn sedan were uploaded and re-uploaded, every angle studied, the way it rested against the snowbank, the shape of the dented hood, the curious rag stuffed into the tailpipe. Some said it was evidence of sabotage. Others argued it was nothing more than a desperate attempt to keep the engine from smoking. But the debate was relentless. Every small inconsistency became fuel. Why did the dogs lose her scent after just 100 yards? Why were there no footprints in the snow? Why did she pack toiletries and textbooks if she was only planning a short trip? The questions multiplied like shadows in candlelight, growing longer, more distorted, never fully graspable. By 2010, Maura's disappearance had morphed into one of the first great internet mysteries. It was no longer just a case, it was folklore. And folklore breeds obsession. People who had never set foot in New Hampshire spoke of her as if they were neighbors. Some devoted years of their lives creating sprawling timelines that stretched dozens of pages. Others claimed visions, dreams, even psychic insight. On forums, usernames that had never met Maura wrote as if they could hear her whispering from the woods. The case had crossed a boundary. It was no longer bound by fact. It had entered the realm of myth. And yet it was always grounded by the unbearable reality for her family. For them, the internet was a double-edged knife. On one hand, it kept her name alive, ensured the world did not forget. On the other, it twisted her memory into endless theories, some cruel, some invasive, many blind to the pain they inflicted. Strangers dissected her character, her relationships, her secrets. They speculated not just about her death, but about who she had been as a person. They painted her as a runaway, as unstable, as reckless, as if reducing her to a theory would make the mystery more manageable. Fred Murray fought against this tide, refusing to let his daughter's image be warped by strangers who knew only fragments. But even he could not stop the storm. The more the years stretched, the larger the online obsession grew. Podcasts, documentaries, true crime shows, Maura's name became a permanent fixture of the genre. And with each retelling, the lines between fact, speculation, and myth blurred further. Still, there were moments that cut through the noise. In 2006, a discovery jolted investigators. A rusty knife, allegedly connected to a local man with a violent history, was turned over to police. For a moment, hope surged. Could this be the answer, buried in plain sight? But the evidence was never conclusive. The knife was tested, the results sealed. Nothing came of it. Another dead end. Another cruel trick of hope. In 2011, a skull was found in the woods near Bethlehem, New Hampshire. The news spread like fire. Could this finally be her? For days, the case surged back into headlines, but forensic analysis ruled it out. It was not Maura. The silence swallowed her name once more. Then came the basement. In 2017, cadaver dogs once again led searchers to a house near the crash site. Their reaction was unmistakable. They alerted near the foundation, beneath the concrete floor. The weight of years pressed down on everyone. Could Maura's remains have been lying here all along, hidden just beneath the surface? Fred Murray demanded excavation. The state refused. Ground-penetrating radar revealed disturbances, but nothing definitive. The basement was never opened. The house still stands. the silence still holds. Each false lead became its own ghost, haunting those who followed the case. Every time hope rose, it was extinguished, leaving the darkness heavier than before. And through it all, time kept moving. By the 2010s, the case had stretched into something beyond comprehension. Children born the year she vanished grew into adults, yet Maura remained frozen in photographs. 21 years old forever. The seasons changed. The road cracked and was repaved. The trees grew taller and older. But the spot where her Saturn once sat remained untouched in spirit. Travelers still stopped there, some leaving flowers, others crossing themselves, some just standing in silence. They spoke of a chill in the air, a weight pressing down as if the land itself remembered. For the Murray family, the decades carved away everything except determination. Fred grew older, his hair silvering, his steps slowing, but his resolve never broke. He once said, "I'll search until my last breath. I won't stop. Ever." His words carried the exhaustion of years, but also the steel of a man who refused to let the silence win. The internet's obsession mirrored his own, though in a distorted way. Strangers across the world confessed that Maura's story haunted them. They spoke of waking in the night, thinking of her alone in the snow, headlights fading, footsteps vanishing. They carried her ghost without ever knowing her. Some admitted it was because her disappearance struck at something primal, the fear that a life could unravel in minutes, that existence could dissolve between one breath and the next. Maura Murray was no longer just a missing person. She had become an idea, a symbol of everything unknowable. And in the suffocating passage of 2 decades, that idea only grew heavier. Each anniversary brought more questions, but fewer answers. Each year of silence became another reminder that some mysteries are not solved, they are endured. The land had closed its fist around her, and it had not opened. 2 decades is not just time passing. It is erosion. It wears people down until they are unrecognizable, until their voices grow thin and their eyes sink with sleeplessness. It wears truth down too, sanding it smooth until nothing sharp is left to hold on to. By the late 2010s, Maura Murray's disappearance had become less like an open investigation and more like an endless ritual. The same questions circled, the same theories resurfaced, the same photographs were passed from hand to hand like relics. Her smile, captured in the years before, no longer looked like a snapshot. It looked like a haunting. Because the more the years passed, the more unnatural it seemed that she was frozen at 21, never aging, never changing, never returning. Her family lived in that stasis, a limbo that suffocated even in daylight. Birthdays came and went, holidays slipped by, chairs sat empty at tables, and yet Maura remained suspended in 2004. They could not bury her, could not mourn her, could not move on. She existed only as a possibility, alive somewhere, hidden somewhere, lying in the earth somewhere. The house near the crash site lingered like a wound that refused to close. The memory of the dogs barking in that basement, the way they scratched at the floor as though something was just beneath them, it clung to her father's mind like a splinter. He pressed officials again and again. Tear it up, dig it out, let me see. But the answer was always the same, inconclusive, insufficient cause, nothing certain. The concrete floor remained sealed, and the silence beneath it remained unbroken. Even the air of the White Mountains seemed to grow heavier in her absence. People who drove through the area spoke of an inexplicable unease, a prickle at the base of the neck when passing the bend on Route 112. Some rolled down their windows at night and swore they could smell something metallic like rust or old blood rising from the trees. Others claimed the silence there was not natural silence, but suffocation, as if the forest was holding its breath. Online, the obsession reached fever pitch. Entire communities lived and breathed her case. They dissected her ATM footage, frame by frame, watching her eyes flick to the side, asking what she might have seen. They magnified photographs of tire tracks in the snow, debating whether another vehicle had been there. They cataloged every rumor, the red truck, the mysterious phone calls, the possibility of a staged escape. It became not just a mystery, but an ecosystem of obsession, feeding on itself. Yet for all the noise, the reality was always the same. She had vanished in the span of minutes, and the earth had swallowed her whole. Those closest to her began to describe her absence not as a void, but as a presence. It was not nothingness. It was something heavy, suffocating, always there. The absence had become a companion, one that shadowed them in every room, every conversation, every attempt to live beyond February 9th, 2004. For strangers, too, she became a phantom. People who had never known her admitted to feeling haunted by her story. They dreamed of headlights cutting through snow, of a figure walking alone down a frozen road, of branches whispering overhead like voices just beyond comprehension. The internet did not just spread her disappearance. It transformed it into a collective haunting, a ghost shared by thousands. And as the 20th year approached, the suffocation only deepened. Time had not revealed the truth. Time had only sealed it tighter, buried it deeper, until the mystery no longer felt solvable. It felt eternal. The mountains stood untouched, their slopes swallowing snow each winter, releasing streams each spring, their forests thickening with each summer, their leaves burning red and gold each autumn. The land endured, indifferent. But for those who searched, every tree, every stone, every shadow whispered the same thing. She is still here. Somewhere. And that is the cruelest truth of all, because 2 decades later, the silence remains. The air is still heavy with rust and pine, the nights still burn with bitter cold, and Route 112 still curves quietly through the woods unchanged. The car is gone, but its memory lingers. The headlights are gone, but the darkness remains. And the road feels like a wound that never closes. The world has moved on. But for Mara's family, for those who carry her ghost, time has stopped. It is still February, still winter, still the night she disappeared, and the silence has only grown heavier. And then, after years of silence so heavy it felt like a physical weight pressing against their chests, something shifted. It was 2019, 15 years after Mara vanished, when investigators returned to that house on Route 112. The basement that had haunted her father for more than a decade was finally opened. Crews drilled into the concrete, breaking the floor where cadaver dogs had once howled and pawed. Neighbors gathered outside, hearts pounding. For a moment, it felt as if time itself was holding its breath, as though this wound, festering for years, was about to burst open. The air inside was rank, filled with the scent of dust and damp, the ghost of mildew that had seeped into the wood. The sound of jackhammers echoed like gunshots, reverberating through the quiet woods. Every strike carried the weight of 15 years of waiting. But when the floor was broken, when the soil beneath was laid bare, there was nothing. Nothing but earth. No bones, no trace, no proof, only more silence. For her father, it was like being thrown back into the night she disappeared all over again. To stand so close to a possible answer, only to be given emptiness, that is its own kind of cruelty. The basement was sealed again, but the wound remained open, rawer than before. And yet, even in the absence of evidence, whispers refused to die. Online, the obsession only grew darker. Some spoke of shadowy figures in pickup trucks seen that night. Others swore she had run into the woods, fleeing from something unseen, only to collapse in the freezing dark. A few clung to the theory that she had staged her own vanishing, that she had built a new life beyond the reach of anyone who once knew her. But if so, why had she never surfaced? Why had she never reached out, even once? Each theory was another hand grasping in the dark, and everyone came back empty. The years pressed on. The 20th anniversary crept closer. 2 decades of waiting, of sleepless nights, of birthdays uncelebrated. The silence of the White Mountains grew heavier with each passing season, snow falling like ash, burying what might still lie beneath. And then came 2021. Deep in the forest, not far from where she vanished, bones were discovered. The news spread like wildfire, hearts seizing, hope clawing upward against reason. Could it be her? Could this be the end of the silence? The remains were tested. The answer came. They were not Mora's. For her family, the hope that had flickered was extinguished. Again. And the road wound back to where it always had, nowhere. The suffocating weight of 20 years bore down harder than ever, because what is more haunting than death? It is the possibility of being forever lost, not laid to rest, not found, simply gone. Route 112 still bends through the New Hampshire woods. The trees still lean in, their branches whispering in the wind. The air still carries the scent of pine and rust and something unnameable. At night, headlights still cut briefly through the dark before vanishing around the curve where her car once stood. And if you stop there, if you step out into the silence, you will feel it. The weight. The absence that is no absence at all, but a presence that never leaves. Because Maura Murray is still there, somewhere. Not in body, perhaps, but in spirit, in the questions that will not die, in the silence that grows heavier with each passing year, in the haunted breath of a landscape that seems to have swallowed her whole. It has been 20 years, and yet it is still February, still winter, still night. The road remains, the silence remains, the question remains, and that is where her story still lives. Not in the answers, but in the terrible, suffocating emptiness that time itself cannot bury.